What have I learnt from the season of 2020-2021 summer growing? I will let you know. G'day there, I'm Dana from Pewakaka Valley Homestead. This year we joined in the SHEDWARS growing competition, and for the people in the southern hemisphere that means that we have grown mostly from October until it's about the end of April. I think the 26th. And then the northern hemisphere, they've just started their growing competition now, and it will end later in the year. So what have I learnt from this growing season? We live in the south of New Zealand, pretty near the coast, so we do get frost. It doesn't get nearly as cold here as a lot of places in the world do, but our actual frost-free growing season isn't actually that long. Our last frost is usually about the beginning-ish of October, and then we can grow through until guaranteed the beginning of April here, but anywhere from now onwards we can sometimes get a sneaky frost. Last year our frost didn't hit here until May. The year before that it was yesterday, so somewhere in that range, that's what we're dealing with. So that means that things like tomatoes and peppers, we have to grow them pretty much under cover. This year I have tried growing some colder variety tomatoes and peppers outside, and I'll show you those, but they've just been a bit of a failure. They have not worked. On our farm we do try and grow most of our vegetables, particularly over the spring, summer and autumn. Over the winter sometimes we do still have to buy some. We grow chickens, we've got pigs and those sorts of things, but my main aim of the game was to try and grow all of our vegetables here. I joined the SHEDWARS competition this year. Actually, honestly, I'd not heard about it until I had been asked to join in. But I thought, you know what, I love meeting new people and being part of a community doing really awesome things. So that's why we joined the SHEDWARS competition this year. And if you've not heard of them, you should follow. If you click on one of the hashtags down below, hashtag SHEDWARS21, it will take you to all the videos of all the other competitors joining in and just all growing food together. So here in the tunnel house, I have learnt a few things. The first thing I have learnt is to really make sure you're labelling your tomatoes correctly. These ones here I thought were my Roma tomatoes, and they are clearly not. And these down here are my Roma tomatoes, and they're doing really poorly because I pruned them all wrong because I thought they were the other tomatoes. So Roma tomatoes are a determinate variety that will grow like a bush. Unfortunately, I pruned these ones right down to one main stem in the same way you would prune an indeterminate variety. So this over here is the Roma tomato. This is how it should have looked, because I left that one alone because I knew what it was, and clearly it's significantly bigger and I got a lot more tomatoes off it. Unfortunately, I stunted the growth of these ones and they've just not recovered, so I have got a lot of tomatoes off them. And they're nice big sized ones, and I'm definitely growing them next year, but I'm going to grow them properly. The other thing I've learned in here is that these artisan blush tomatoes are my favourite. They are delicious. They're quite sweet in the flesh, but the actual juice of them is still quite sharp and tomatoey, and I really enjoy eating them. Another thing I have learnt is that these jalapenos get whitefly really easily. So now that I've got on top of those, next year when I grow them, I'm going to routinely spray them with some neem oil to try and keep them away, because you can see here these ones were stunted by the whitefly, and since I've got on top of the whitefly, the ones that have grown since then are doing really well. In fact, here's a really big red one that I need to pick. The other thing I have learnt is that melons just aren't worth attempting here, and cucumbers are dodgy at best. This is my pickling cucumber. I've just left that to go because I haven't had enough cucumbers off it to even bother pickling from. This is my other cucumber plant down here. This is all it's done. And look, this is my melon, and all it grew was this tiny little one melon. I'm not going to bother wasting my time on those anymore. Now this is something I learnt last year, but I'm putting it into place this year, is that interplanting between my tomato plants now means that I can harvest greens and other such vegetables all winter long. So partway through the summer, I think it was about a month, maybe a month and a half ago, I came through here and just snuck some seeds of some cauliflower in between my tomato plants, and they've done really well, and you can see them here. These cauliflower plants are growing nice and big, and they will continue to grow in here all the way through winter, and I will get a harvest off those. I did this last year and it was brilliant. It meant we had fresh lettuce, fresh cauliflower and fresh broccoli all winter long. Another thing I have learnt is that tomatoes that are F1 varieties do not grow true to seed. This was some seeds that I got from a seed bank, and I was told that they were whatever variety they were, but these turns out they were an F1 variety, and these have resorted back to their wild type, so lots and lots of tiny little cherry tomatoes. They are quite tasty, but they split almost as soon as you pick them, and they're really small, so they're almost not worth picking, so I'm definitely not growing those again. Other things I've learned out here this year, the Māori potatoes grew really well. I'm really happy with those, and we'll definitely be growing them again. These runner beans have done really well growing up this trellis, and we'll definitely, these are Blue Lake runners, and I've decided they're pretty much my favourite. I really enjoy those. The scarlet runners that actually grew have done quite well, but that whole row should all be filled with them, so there's barely any that have grown. The beans that are on there, I'm just going to let them mature, and we will store them either as dry beans, and I'll also use some of them to replant that row to hopefully get some more established. I've had it driven home to me this year not to bother growing broccoli during the summer. We just get decimated with those white cabbage butterflies, and the caterpillars just completely destroy the plants. My kids came out the other day and picked over 100 caterpillars just off the brassicas that are out here. Lettuce continues to do wonderfully, and again with the cabbage, this has all been eaten by cabbage butterflies. These are the Arctic something or other tomatoes, and they're supposed to do really well outside. These took forever to get going, and now they're finally going, and I think they're going to be smashed by a frost before any of these tomatoes have a chance to ripen. There are quite a few down there, but I just don't think they're going to make it. The hot weather has not been nice to my carrots. We had a whole lot of rain earlier in the season, then just kind of nothing. So as you can see, I've had really patchy germination with these carrots. We're on tank water, so I don't water the garden routinely. Also, I'm too busy to remember. So what's come up has come up, and hopefully there'll be more come up as the rain starts happening. I have oversown them with some of the carrot seeds that I've saved, and these seem to be coming up, so that's exciting. Hopefully we will still have some carrots for the winter. Something I have learned is that this bug mesh over these hoops keeps the butterflies off, and so these cauliflowers are doing really, really well. So I think I might make my 3 back gardens over by the tunnel house. I think I might do hoops like this and do 2 of them in plastic. I'll explain that why soon, and another one with the mesh over it so that we can grow more brassicas. This is our celery on this side and celeriac on this side, and honestly I don't think we've had enough rain for the celery to grow well. It's largely quite dry in the centre, and actually I think I'm going to write on my calendar to sow the seeds for these about 6 to 8 weeks later, so that we've got them growing like this during the winter, which is what we did last year, and we harvest them all winter and they're crispy and juicy and delicious. Over the summer they haven't had enough water, they've been hit by rust, they've had a really rough go. So yes, they look big and luscious, but actually it's because we haven't been harvesting them, because the stalks are kind of hollow and they're not so nice to eat. I do have high hopes for my celeriac though. Now these are our outside tomatoes, and as you can see some of them do have a few little tomatoes growing, but most of them will not ripen before the frost hits. So what I want to do is grow these same varieties, but grow them under a plastic tunnel like what I've done over there, and hopefully that means we will get a lot more from them. They've been quite nice robust plants, but they just haven't produced early enough to avoid the frost. Now this is our makeshift tiny hoop, and I'm really impressed at how well it's done. In here we have got some kumara or sweet potato growing, which you cannot grow at this as far south as we are or as close to the coast as we are, and yet it's growing. So I'm really excited to see whether it's managed to make any tubers once it starts dying off. The other thing that I've got growing in here is peppers, which we can't grow outside here, but under this tunnel they're doing really, really well. They're quite nice big banana peppers hanging out in here. So next season I want to do 3 of these little hoops so we can grow more and more of the vegetables that we can't usually grow outside here, and I might even try some cucumbers in one. The only only real downside to having them under cover like this is I do have to remember to water them. And also this plastic is not windproof in the same way that the big tunnel house stuff is. So you can see over here it's just been smashed by the autumn wind that started coming through. But for a really cheap tunnel house, it's just held together with these cheap building clamps, throw on some plastic over the top, and other than that it's just some 1-inch pipe and a ridge rail made of 2-inch by 1-inch cheap timber. So it's been a really cheap way of getting some decent season extension, and it's worked so well I'm going to do more of them. We originally started gardening, well, I originally started gardening because we'd just built a house and our mortgage was really high and we didn't have enough money to buy enough food. So it was a blessing having this new house, but it was also really hard work making ends meet. And so we got ourselves a border to use our spare bedroom, and I learnt to grow our own food. I've grown up with a vegetable garden. My parents always had one, my grandparents always had one, but it was never interesting to me to help garden in it myself. Occasionally I would help weed, and as I got older I would often spend the first couple of weeks of my summer holidays weeding the garden, but it often wasn't the vegetable garden, and I wasn't really learning those skills deliberately. I'm sure I picked some up along the way, but it wasn't my priority in life as a teenager to learn how to grow food. Later on, once we got older and obviously we needed some food to eat, I put together a small garden and we started growing things. And then as we've had children, and then we finally ended up with this place, and now we've got 10 acres. Slowly but surely I have built up my gardening skills and I have learnt to grow more and more food. However, gardening is a life lesson, and it is something that you learn every year. You learn something different every season. I'm always experimenting, trying new things, trying to work out what we can grow here and what we can't, and what we can, but maybe with some alterations and some different varieties. I do find being able to grow our own food really beneficial, and the kids love eating the homegrown stuff as well. It is really nice to be able to say to the kids, can you go and grab some carrots out of the garden, or go grab the tomatoes out of the garden? And they're really willing to go and help do that. They'll often help plant things out, they'll often help harvest things, and they've been out today helping picking pumpkins, gathering up the onions. My eldest is now gathering up the tomatoes for me as well. Also, growing a garden is really helpful for growing food for the animals as well. Partly the chickens get all the weeds, they get the caterpillars, they get the slugs and the grubs and those sorts of things. But if we have excess produce, it's great to know that it's not going to waste, it's just getting turned into either meat or eggs. What do you reckon? Do you like gardening? Yeah. So this guy helps me plant seeds and often helps me planting the seedlings and things out. It's nice to be able to involve the kids. Obviously things take a little longer as they're learning as well, but it's nice to be able to have them help and teaching them the life lessons that are good for them learning to grow their own food as well. Goose. We're out here in my survival garden, and there are a few things I've learnt this year out here was, well, one of them is that the corn gets eaten. If the silks get eaten, then you're not going to get any corn. So unfortunately we had an infestation. I think it must have been the earwigs that did it, because the corns were all full, the ears of corn were all full of earwigs. So I think they were the ones that ate the silks off, so we got very, very little corn. My review of the whole Three Sisters garden thing was we got 0 beans. No, I lie. I think I picked 2 beans. Got really bad corn, but the squash have done really well. The pumpkins have done really well. But I think that's probably more to do with what we'd planted underneath the pumpkins than it was to do with the whole Three Sisters thing. Next year we'll definitely do the corn again. We'll definitely plant the squash under the corn because that seems like a really good use of space. I'm not going to bother with the beans. They really did nothing, and I think I'd be better off growing the beans separately somewhere else. The spare tomato plants that we planted out here, we're probably going to get a very small bowl full off of the tomato plants we had out here. It's more than nothing, but I think again it was a complete waste of time and waste of resources planting them out here. As you can see, they're not doing so well. Like these ones are ripening, that a lot of them are being eaten by birds. They're just not protected enough here, I think. And I think the weather's just getting too cold, so the plants are all starting to curl up and die off already. Right, here we are in the middle of what was once my corn patch, and you can see the corn's dying off there. And you can see there were squash plants all planted in amongst here, and they are all dying back, which says to me that the frost is very close. So you can see the little pumpkins hiding in amongst everything in here. This here, believe it or not, is my potato patch, and it is full of barley. It's because I actually mulched it all with barley straw, which worked really well to keep the birds off, but has all grown up, and I'm struggling to find any of the potato plants in here. This was a second crop of potatoes, and in theory we had enough time to grow more and get a second crop out, but the reality is I think we're going to be hit by frost before the potatoes have had any chance to form anything useful. So what I plan on doing on this garden bed is just tarping it down, letting all the barley just mulch down into the ground. I'll do that really shortly before these seed heads ripen enough to actually make seeds, and they will at least compost as a green manure and help feed the soil. Second potato round certainly didn't happen, but you know, life's full of lessons, and this is one of them for us. Another thing I have learnt this year out here is that the ochre or New Zealand yam do not do well with competition, and they definitely don't do well when the birds dig them out. So I have got some plants that are doing quite well, but this garden bed should in theory be completely full of them, but the birds came in and scratched them up and flicked them out, and they've done a really poor job of growing. Hey dude, what you doing? You're doing some gardening. Another thing I have learnt is that these onions do not do so well here. We've grown 2 different varieties this year, and these ones are the Italian long keepers, and some of them have bulbed up okay, a lot of them haven't, and a vast number of them are just going straight off to seed. So I'm going to have to pull these out. Most of them will just become like an onion powder because I can't store anything with a really thick neck like that. So I'll just pull them all out and turn them all into onion powder. Whereas at the other end of this garden we grew Spanish onions. I can't remember exactly what, Spanish something. And they did really well, and they're not as big as these guys, but they ripened well. They didn't go off to flowers. And so I'll probably grow more of those next year because they're doing really well. I hope you found that video useful. If you have, hit the like button and consider subscribing to our channel. We bring you videos twice a week on growing and preserving your own food and other homesteading bits and pieces. We'll see you in the next one.